Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Professor Tulin Boutaleb, the Interim Dean of the School of Computing Engineering and Built Environment at Glasgow, Caledonian. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our Alumni Online Talk. Today, we're honored to have Rozina Spinnoy, a GCU alumnus and distinguished speaker, share her journey and insights on designing for social impact and innovation. Rozina is a multifaceted creative and entrepreneur with a portfolio spanning urban placemaking, interior architecture, and concept development. Her work emphasizes inclusion, diversity, and youth empowerment, while also advocating for mental health and societal change. Through her efforts, Rozina challenges biases and fosters empathy and foresight. We're thankful for Rozina's support and delighted to have her here. I'm eager to learn from her experiences, as I'm sure we are all. So let's warmly welcome Rozina Spinnoy to join us on screen and begin today's talk.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, Professor Tulin. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and thank you to Glasgow Caledonian University for the invitation. So I'm really looking forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rozina. Same here. Shall we just reflect a bit back to your time at GCU and just take us back to your time and what GCU and any key memories? Why GCU?
That's a good question. Indeed, I'll take you back. I actually went to GCU as a mature student. I didn't know what I wanted to do actually when I left school. And being very honest, I didn't do too well at school because I had operations in my legs that took me out of my education for quite a while. And then as soon as I was 17, I actually started to work. And I worked in accountancy and tax, of all things, for 3 years, and then stockbroking. And I knew that my heart was not in this and I wanted to go back to further education. And I remember there was an open day from Glasgow College of Building and Printing that was obviously affiliated with GCU. And I'd always been creative, and this was something that stemmed from school. I had a wonderful art teacher who really encouraged me and was quite a mentor, I have to say. And then I met Sandra Gunn, who was head of the department at Glasgow College of Building and Printing, and I decided to do interior design. And what I loved about this course that would then go on and obviously affiliate with GCU, with going on to do the BSc degree and the honours degree, was the fact that it was science-based at university. I did also, of course, go to Glasgow School of Art and had a look and see what they were doing with their BA in design, and it was wonderful. But what I loved about Glasgow Caledonian University was the course was very mixed. We had the mix of mathematics, we had the mix of PR and branding, we had environmental sciences, fire regulations. There was all the functional aspect of university, which I loved that mix. And of course, when I started university, there was more than 50% were mature students. And that's something that also made me feel very comfortable. And I think the memories, the strong memories I have, I think, of university life certainly was being more appreciative because I had consciously chosen this route. It wasn't sort of family pressure of like, right, this is what you're expected to do as soon as you leave university or leave school, I mean. It was really a conscious choice after spending time working in the professional environment and looking and seeing where would I choose to study. And at that point, I think the memories were, I think the opportunity to study and realizing it's a real privilege. Education is a privilege. And I actually am the youngest of 7 in my family who are Pakistani Scottish. My parents came over in 1958 to Scotland, and I'm actually the first one in the family that actually went to university and to study. And so I realised my privilege and the opportunities such as Erasmus. The Erasmus exchange was a huge opportunity, and there was only four students that would be allowed to go from the year, and we all had to write a motivation letter. And of course, I wrote my motivation letter, and I was just delighted, absolutely delighted to be selected. And it was either going to be Helsinki or Crete. And I was very lucky to indeed go to the Technological Educational Institute in Heraklion for just under a year, and it was a wonderful experience. So I have very, very fond memories, and I've made amazing connections that I still stay in touch with from that experience at Crete, as well as university.
Amazing, amazing, Rozina. You've touched on so many different areas there and so many super memories. Really, really amazing. So if we move on a bit onto your career journey. So since graduating, you have enjoyed an incredible career as a design strategist, social entrepreneur. So much so you are called upon internationally, discuss the importance of inclusion, social design. Tell us more about how your career developed.
My career developed, as mentioned initially, of course, when I left school, I had that business aspect, that business side with accountancy and tax. And then when I decided to study design, I knew this was the career I wanted to go into. And of course, having left university, there was a little bit of temping that always happens, temporary work. And even during my university studies, every 3 months I would still work. I would work in the stockbrokers, and I decided, right, this is not what I want to be doing when I graduate. I want to be really practicing design and mixing that with business. And I was very fortunate that after that temporary work that I did during the time of the studies and for a year after graduating, I worked in social work while I decided what it was that I wanted to do. A fantastic opportunity came up with the boutique hotel brand Malmaison. Mm-hmm. And of course, this seemed to be perfect because it was combining the aspect of design and business. And a hotel is a bit of everything. It's a community, it's a public space, private, public in a way, if you think of the lobby. Mm-hmm. It's a bedroom, it's a restaurant, and you're having to think of the branding, the concepts, the marketing, as well as this environment of it not being cookie cutter, that whatever environment that you're in, that you want to bring a little bit of the local context into that brand. And so I enjoyed a great time at the Malmaison headquarters, working as a marketing coordinator. And of course, at that point, I think there were 5 hotels across the UK. And probably about a year or so after starting there, I had also met my Belgian husband, who was based in Glasgow, and he was working in Greenock. And at that point, also the hotel brand was up for sale. And so then it's just the way it worked out. I guess the stars were aligned that the company that was going to be operating Malmaison was based in Brussels. And so then I moved over to Belgium to work for the Radisson group of hotels. The Europe, Middle East, Africa headquarters were here. And I moved over at a very exciting time when it was kind of going multi-brand. And there I was initially in the regional office and working in, again, it was marketing, but for Southern Europe, Benelux and Iceland. Bizarre mix there. And I stayed there in various positions for several years, actually, and then moved on to headquarters after a year of being in the regional office. And then the world became really small, where we were indeed working across Europe, Middle East and Africa, and working in the Department of Brand and Concept Development, and bringing a little bit of that PR and marketing that I'd also been taught at university. And that's what I loved. I think it was linking some of the theory to the practical of what I'd been taught. and of course bringing in this business aspect. And I worked there in hotel design as well. And during that time, of course, I was also raising my young family. So I had three children whilst I was in corporate life. And I'm not saying that it was easy, because it certainly isn't, being a woman, I think, when you're juggling everything. But thankfully, with having a good partner on board, it worked out fine. And then I decided, I think after my third son, I decided that I wanted to start out my own. This was always a dream, actually, to start my own company. And I thought perhaps this was the right opportunity. So when I had my third son, I decided then to actually ask the CFO and CEO if they could fire me and make me redundant, so that I could have a little bit of money to start my own business. And so then it was really working for myself as a designer. I set up a company, and it was really getting to know my local market. And it was scary, because of the fact, I hadn't known my local market before, because, of course, being in Belgium, I was used to being in this international office with 30 different nationalities, 80 people, and then suddenly I had to get to know my local market. But, of course, being very lucky that Brussels is a very diverse country, that a lot of international clients and mixed clients were coming my way for residential and commercial projects. And slowly using that knowledge of how do I build a brand? How can I build a brand with just me? And how can I be the brand? And then, at that point, social media was quite rife. And so I was like creating a Facebook page and everything, and started working in interior design and project management for renovations for residential and corporate clients. And then around 2016, I decided that I also wanted to work on the outside environment. If I can design the inside as a blank canvas, how can I design the outside? How can I design an environment that's inclusive, sustainable? How can I bring some of that expertise of what I've learned into community and social design, into participatory design and urban design? And I was by no means an expert in these fields, because I didn't study those topics, but I could really see that over the years, the benefit of design strategy, design thinking, this can be applied. The application of design can be applied to different sectors. And started to experiment, and I started an NGO then called Business Improvement Districts, which was based loosely on the bids that are existing in Scotland and many other countries around the world, but not a focus on just business, but more a community improvement approach. And that's where I've been ever since. But also, of course, I've had my finger in different pots. And so with that, improvement districts, that's been getting involved in the community design aspect, in inclusion, in topics like how do we design inclusive education, what does it mean to have, what does sustainable mean, and really experimenting with different partners, different people that are also freelancers and running their own companies, and networking a lot. To create those collaborations within the ecosystem with like-minded people.
What an amazing journey, Rozina. That's an amazing career journey. I mean, the opportunities, but also the decisions that you have taken, including as well, asking to be fired. That's some really, really very courageous in there. Amazing. So if we take the last bit that you were talking about, and especially when we're looking into inclusive communities, community engagement, in what ways can community engagement be leveraged to ensure that the design of environment is both inclusive and sustainable? So you started touching on that, and I wonder if you can go into a bit more detail.
Absolutely, and I think this is also something that is definitely fascinated me a lot about community and the aspect of community and identity. Even as mentioned before, I take it a little bit back to, I guess, the heritage of having parents that came from Asia to Scotland, and I had a very strong Scottish identity and being brought up in Scotland, and then coming to Belgium, it really, I guess, was a bit of a culture shock. I have to be honest. We have got 3 regions, several governments, we have 3 languages, of Flemish, French, and German. 3 regions, the Brussels region, Walloon region, which is mainly French speaking, Flanders, which is mainly Flemish speaking, and Dutch speaking, and Brussels is a real mix, even though predominantly French speaking and of course very English with the institutions that are based here. And in 2016 was quite a significant moment here. We had the terrorist attacks in March 2022, the day I was actually due to launch my NGO. And previous to that, there was the attacks in Paris in November. And I think it fascinated me about identity and community. Here, there's more than 180 nationalities of people. And what is a Belgian identity? Is it a Belgian identity? Probably not, only when there's football, I think. When the Red Devils play, then they all come together and it's a strong Belgian identity. And I really wanted to understand, like, what are the factors that can contribute to community engagement and community design? And of course, a big part of that is co-design and co-creation, and adopting this sort of participatory approach to design and co-design with community members, but then ensuring that the community members, it's diverse and intersectional perspectives. And how do we engage with diverse range of community members, including the individuals with disabilities, marginalised groups, and residents of different ages and backgrounds, and understanding firstly, like, who is the community? We've got 19 municipalities, for example, in Brussels, and in my municipality, I think the highest demographic is Romanian people, in a small population of 22,000 in this municipality. And so it's, you know, we have to be representative of the society that we're designing for. We have to have everyone around the table and those voices around the table. And then there's the aspect of really this kind of accessibility and the communication, ensuring that everyone has a voice, everyone that is invited around the table, that they are included in that conversation and in that narrative, and making that narrative very understandable and easy, that people feel relaxed, and also having community ambassadors that are trusted community ambassadors within the community. It's not me coming in and telling people how they should do it. It's working with people. It's co-designing together. And this part for me was really important, because it was like a little bit of this kind of promoting the social cohesion. How do we bring those different voices together? How do we practice inclusion? How do we practice co-creation and address a lot of the challenges that are important for the people around the table? Understanding what are those problems. It was always going by the question, what is the problem we want to solve together? What's the most important to the community? And ultimately really building that trust together, and also that accountability, that, you know, everyone feels a part of it, a part of the co-creation. And also, it's not to be a kind of token gesture.
Yeah.
We're doing a co-design as a one-off and it's ticking a box, which I've seen happen a lot when it comes to, you know, the political aspect. It can be seen, right, we're doing participative democracy and it's ticking a box. But we need a pre-design process in defining what the methodologies are, ensuring that facilitation is fully inclusive, and we need a post-design process where everyone still feels part of that process. So that communication is paramount, that we really have a long-term sustainable vision of what co-creation is and working together to solve those problems together. These are just some of the things that I think are important.
No, it's amazing, because it's that genuine side that you're talking about. You know, it is that the change, you know, that you really want to change is not just a temporary thing, and it is really looking at that long term, and coming within as well is really, really important. All the areas, you know, that you have covered in there, and really to continue on to that, and more specifically in the design bit. So looking into the well-being part as well, that is really, really important. So inclusivity, well-being, really important. How do you believe that architectural and urban design can contribute to creating more inclusive environments and really more with a focus on the mental health concern side as well?
Thanks. That's a very good question. Again, I think it's about bringing the diverse sectors together. If I think of back in corporate life when we were designing a hotel, we would be around the table, we'd have the project manager, you'd have the architect, you'd have the designer, you'd have the investor, the developer, you would even sometimes have the investor's wife, or it was interdisciplinary. You would have everyone around the table, the different disciplines around the table. And I think that's really important, that we have the different voices around the table. And I think, to create accessible, safe spaces that are sort of easy to navigate in and reduce the physical barriers and the stress and anxiety for people and individuals with mental health. It takes me back to probably a moment when I went to go and visit a new school here, and it was a school for children with disabilities. And actually it's a school that my middle son went to, because my middle son has got mental health issues and is neurodivergent. So that's where you can also see a lot of the passion came from, to want to work in a challenge that was close to my heart as well. And I remember visiting this school, and they had been very, very sensitive and having the right therapists and people as part of the design process to understand even things like the colour psychology and what kind of safe spaces do children that have autism, or people that are blind, children that are blind, what kind of safe spaces can we have, and having the braille, having open spaces that weren't in any way dangerous or could be a danger. And I also remember they had this amazing sculpture outside that children could play with. It was designed by a famous artist in the US. And again, it was very sensitive to the needs of the children, and it could make sort of certain vibrative, sounds and noise, and it was reflective, it was touchy-feely. It was really putting the children at the heart of this, and all kinds of disabilities. And I think also when we think of urban spaces and the environment, we have to think of green spaces and access to public space and greenery and the impact that has on us. And I think incorporating natural elements, like of course having natural daylight, having greenery, it's neuroscientifically proven, of course, that nature has a positive effect on our well-being and mental health. And I think we see more and more of that, of course, with the biophilic design coming in. So we need to kind of adapt to having more nature and sustainable materials, organic materials in our built environment as well. And I think, we know that, as I mentioned, that this sort of stress hormone of cortisol goes down when we're around nature. I know how I feel when I'm looking out at the trees, or I'm in nature, or there's an environment where there's a mix of materials of the wood and, all of the sort of sustainable materials. And I think we have to consider these elements. We have to really think about our urban environment and how are we designing for the needs of the people around, but also how do we create and co-design that well-being into our architecture and built environment. And we're seeing it across cities everywhere. More car-free zones, more nature, more public spaces. Certainly Paris has got a huge plan, of course, of going more car-free. We see the low emission zones. We see the impact of that this has, not only on saving lives when it comes to car crashes, etc., but also more walkable cities, more walkable communities, more healthy communities. Thinking how the air pollution, we want to all have clean air when we're breathing, and of course we also have to think about urban heat and climate change. We know that more and more cities, certainly across Europe, are having these heat waves, and we have to think, how can we bring more nature and trees into the city? Even Brussels itself, there was a sort of redesign going on in public space, and it became a bit like a concrete city in some of these spaces. And now there's another design phase happening of, oh, we must plant more trees, because also the temperature can go down by 4 degrees if you're in an urban heat environment. And we certainly were by no means the Mediterranean, we're in Brussels, but we do and can have heat waves of up to 40 degrees every year of 1 week, 2 weeks. And we need to think of what is that environment what's the environment we want, and how can architects and designers and those in the urbanism sector contribute to that.
Amazing, Rozina. Honestly, even as you are speaking, I was imagining and I was relaxing already. It was really even impacting me as you are, explaining these different areas. And I don't know if you know, with the Glasgow City Centre, they've got the Z plan, and a lot of it as well is embedding a number of areas that you have mentioned. So yeah, it's really amazing.
And also, Talene, I have to mention one other aspect,
Yeah.
which of course I failed to do, and that I'm a great advocate of, is of course spaces are also safe for women.
Yes.
I mean, this is a huge thing, this sort of feminist urbanism, but also looking at how do we create, and how can architects and designers and policymakers, because I think we need to have more women in those fields and more diverse women in those fields, designing our cities to have that gendered lens, and how we create those safe spaces. If you've got a green space and you're walking through a park at night, is it safe? And so these are also aspects we must consider.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely. Okay, so on the mental health experience side, and really from your experience, you've touched there a bit on that. What environmental factors have you found to be really the most influential in supporting or hindering mental health?
I think there again, I have to mention the aspect of green spaces again.
Yeah.
I think we've seen during COVID period, certainly, and that we certainly seen it here in Brussels as well, of course, the inequities of areas where there's a lower socioeconomic demographic, and not having access to green space or gardens when parks and a lot of the public areas were closed. They couldn't have that privilege of, nipping out into the back garden and, sitting outside. And I think those inequities we have to address as well, of course, when it comes to safe, comfortable housing. What do we mean by that? How can we reduce, the risks of homelessness, and which can exacerbate mental health issues? And of course, also on that other side of social support networks, of course, if we have public spaces and public areas, it's also has an impact on social isolation. You're creating more zones if it's a marketplace or if it's a public space for social interaction. If there's seating there, if there's accessibility there, you're creating a space for all in the community to gather, to sit and chat to whoever you happen to be sitting next to. It's a sense of community. And we're seeing a lot of these kind of the rise of sort of placemaking, and that phrase of placemaking, or how do we create a sense of place outside, and what does that mean? And I think that also is about creating these safe, inclusive, sustainable spaces that are for all. As I say, we can have spaces which aren't necessarily accessible, and we certainly have them here, and I think we have them in every city. I even think when my kids were small and I was going with a pram, with a stroller through the park, or I wanted to maybe nip into town and I couldn't because there wasn't an elevator, it wasn't accessible. And so, we have to think of every aspect of how can we design. If we design for the most vulnerable, we design for all. If we use that aspect of sort of universal design principles. And in terms of environmental aspects, of course, there's so many systemic things I can go into as well, but it's access to so many things, whether it's housing, whether it's healthcare, and access even to sports, culture, education. We need to create inclusive environments And we need to co-design inclusive environments and have processes that are inclusive. And then I think, you know, if we even acknowledge that and realize that we need to, across all sectors, think about how can we educate for the most vulnerable? How can we care for patients that are the most vulnerable? How can we create a community for the most vulnerable? Then I think that these kind of things can contribute to thinking about some of those environmental factors, as well as I say, about the public spaces, like you mentioned in Glasgow, and it's happening in Milan, Paris, Brussels, a lot of cities where city leaders are attempting to create those participatory processes and create those green spaces and public spaces that are more walkable, that certainly encourage that community participation and for people to come together. And we've seen it in Brussels also for many years, in front of the former stock exchange building. It was, you know, cars going through the city, and then they pedestrianised this zone. Of course, there was a lot of backlash as well. But then now suddenly it's a beautiful green walkable space, lacking a few trees, which I hope the city will put in. But certainly, you know, the public space, it's lively, it's vibrant, and, you know, the businesses also see that impact now. Whereas before they would think, oh, people can't park their car in front of the shop. Well, actually, no, now more people are passing by because they're walking by. So I think there's a lot of different environmental factors, I think, that can really contribute to our mental health and well-being in a positive way. And we have a responsibility to do that.
Okay, so if we move on to the area of policy and impact, so how can policymakers better integrate mental health consideration into their planning, design of urban spaces, and how can we best measure that impact?
I would give an example that I guess I've experienced myself. I'm really pleased to say, and I was honoured to be asked by the European Commission on World Mental Health Day on the 10th of October last year. Policymakers, a lot of administrators realised the power of participation and having people with lived experience and having those diverse interdisciplinary collaborations, how that can make an impact on policy making. We need to really encourage collaboration between urban planners, architects, psychologists, public health experts, community stakeholders, that to consider those mental health considerations when we're integrating and thinking about the planning and design process. And I think if we're talking about being sustainable, I always say this phrase that, you know, there's no sustainability without care. Yeah. And for me, this all interlinks. Everything actually interlinks. And I think we do need to develop absolutely the policies where mental health is a component of that urban planning. And we're seeing it more and more, of course, when we think about healthy communities or designing, you know, healthy, inclusive cities. What does that mean? And we're already obviously experiencing that. So I think multi-stakeholder collaborations for sure. And again, that community engagement, you know, you want to create an environment where people, again, it affects their mental health if they feel totally, or their well-being if they're very detached from their local environment. And there's not a sense of belonging, not a sense of identity, where they feel their voice isn't heard. And again, it's that at a very local level, having that community participation. I've seen it happen in my own municipality here, where the local council decided to have not just a consultation, but actually collaboration with active citizens to co-design a community cafe or bar in the park that was actually volunteers had raised the money together with public sector, and they were contributing, and it brought together community in the park to also run and operate this community project together with local government. And I think this community engagement is really important as well. And that certainly had an impact on people's mental health and well-being, for sure. We were also in a park, so there's also the added aspect of being in greenery under the trees and really sort of designing for inclusivity. I think we need to design again those sort of accessible spaces for the diverse populations that our cities are now, you know, that always have been, that are becoming perhaps more diverse through many different reasons. And I think we need to, you know, think about the safe pedestrian infrastructure, safe infrastructures for cyclists. I have to say I'm not very confident myself, despite there being a kind of move more towards cycling in the city, and there's more happening. But you know, it's still dangerous. So we need to really think about these things. And I think it's really creating this community of care, ultimately, through collaboration and through our processes, I think, that we can create and destigmatize even aspects of mental health and isolation if we're creating and designing those spaces together, and create awareness and education campaigns around the participatory processes that we want to create. And also, I think there's a lot to understanding it doesn't have to be top down. It's about top down meeting bottom up and working transversely. It's about working on an even keel together. So that's what I believe that we can really do. And as I said, I think the post-design or co-design processes are really important, that people feel still part of the process. If something doesn't work that's been co-designed together, or there's, you know, an urban infrastructure that doesn't work, okay, how can we readdress that? How can we, you know, value engineer that and go back to the table and think, what else can we do? And as I say, having all the voices around the table really matters.
Absolutely. Okay, so looking forward, what would you think that are the key trends or changes you anticipate in the design of environments that, again, what we've been talking about, will promote mental health, inclusivity?
I think some of those aspects I probably have touched on, but it's also this equitable access.
Yeah.
Having access for all. I think really, you know, prioritizing and creating these inclusive environments that are accessible for all individuals in all abilities, and all socioeconomic backgrounds, young, old, different ethnicities, designing, as I said, for the most vulnerable, and then I think you've got it for everybody, for sure. And I think we're seeing a lot of that term of biophilic design. You know, I mean, I remember years ago being like wowed by when Apple opened their store in Brussels, and you know, they had these trees inside the store, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And you know, they built the space around the trees, and I think more and more we're seeing that, you know, and a lot of these sort of big corporate companies like Apple and Google, they've been doing that, having these kind of flexible workspaces that are also for relaxation as well, or whether it's playing pool or sitting by the plants, you know. And 2 weeks ago I was there at the Google offices here, and I have to say I was really impressed. I was like, are these all plastic flowers? No, they weren't, thankfully. They were real. And I think having this flexibility and adaptability is a big thing as well. Having spaces that can be flexible in design. You know, we know that, you know, perhaps sometimes there isn't always, when I think of work-life balance, you know, does it mean we always switch off and it's a 9 to 5? No, of course not, because, you know, now we know, certainly since COVID, we've got those spaces where we can work from home and we can pop into the office as well. And I think creating these kind of relaxed environments which considers having nature around us and that are flexible. And of course there's technology. I mean, there's huge opportunities when it comes to AI and tech there, and augmented reality, really, when we think of sort of the immersive technologies. And I think, but again, there we need to always remember that technology is a tool,
Yeah.
you know. And I think another aspect which I mentioned certainly when it came to the school is this kind of sensory sensitive design. It's really consider who are the people using this space and whether it's being culturally sensitive or whether it's being sensitive in other aspects of thinking about, you know, people with disabilities. It's really understand who is using your space and how can we design and co-design with them together. Yeah, that's what comes to mind really.
That's been amazing, fascinating. We had already, I can see some live questions. We had some pre-submitted questions as well. So I'll try my best to go through and ask as many, Rozina, because I can see that, you know, as much as I enjoyed it, everyone else enjoyed it. Okay, so if I start with the first question from a graduate. So as a visionary entrepreneur, what advice would you give to a new graduate who's considering self-employment over applying for jobs? So, what's your...
Now, there's, I guess, pros and cons to both, isn't there?
Yeah.
I mean, I've been fortunate, I've been in both aspects, but of course, I can go from the perspective of having been employed when I was a graduate, and I know that gave me the business sense that I needed and the mentoring through the people around me and understanding what was expected of me when I am in a corporate environment. I think the aspects of, and I think the network, sorry to go back to that, I think the network, I built up a huge network when I was working and the various jobs that I did. And those networks stayed with me when I became self-employed. And I think when I became self-employed, I've got no regrets whatsoever. And it was the flexibility. I think that absolute flexibility and independence aspect, you have the freedom to make your own decisions. I didn't need to have it signed off by a boss. You know, and I could develop my own vision and I didn't need to seek permission, you know, when I had to go to the Milan Furniture Fair anymore. I could just go, or when it was Paris to Maison Objects. And I think the opportunity for creativity of not being limited within the constraints of the formal job that I was in, even though you can get entrepreneurs as well as being you know, entrepreneur. You can be slightly entrepreneurial in a job as well, but you still have kind of boundaries there. And I think with doing your own thing, you certainly have that freedom. But I think the skills development was on both sides. It was both being employed and being self-employed. I learned an awful lot when I was employed, for sure. And the world became small, as I said, of dealing internationally. And that didn't give me any fear when I was an independent to then work internationally or to reach out. So that skills development, I think you can really, you know, develop a wide range of skills also when you're self-employed, and you learn, you know, the self-management of your time management as well. And I think the sort of, but the aspects are you've got to be a bit of everything. You know, you're not in a department like you are when you're working in a firm. You've got to be everything. You've got to be the administration, the business developer, the marketing, the PR, the accountant, and be the one doing the work and dealing with your clients initially starting out, unless you're in a position where, okay, you know, you can straight away maybe work with other freelancers and agree a kind of business to business arrangement and fee if you're working with other freelancers, which is what I actually chose to do. Instead of employing people, it was really working with other freelancers, and that was a huge benefit for sure. But of course, let's not deny, if you are self-employed, there's also there's not financial security the way that you do when you're employed and you have your month by month salary, of course, and you know, there's a lack of benefits. You're not necessarily going to be part of a pension scheme. or have a company car, or the lunch vouchers and all of these things. So you have to account for all of these things, of course, as well. Sometimes I think it can be quite isolating if you're working by yourself, unless you make a point of going out and networking and being in co-working spaces or collaborating with others on projects. It's a lot of responsibility, I think, in regards to having your own business or your own organisation. You have to take care of the legal complexities as well, of course. So you have to be a little bit of everything. So I would say do your research in all aspects, talk to as many people as you can, those that have gone freelance, those that are in a company that you have identified you'd like to work for, or if you haven't identified, certainly ask around in that sector you want to work, reach out to different companies, go on LinkedIn, connect to lots of people, don't be afraid of asking. I think what I found is people are very open to help and give advice, and also reach out and to your mentors or people that you know already in your network, whether it's family members, friends. Reach out and ask them in all honesty how it is in that company. What is the culture? Is it aligned with your values and your purpose? And also identify what are your kind of values and purpose? What are the things that are important for you? And I think also one big thing, if you're working on your own, I would say, or starting up on your own, always be transparent to your clients. Be honest, and you can realize that you can manage your time, but be honest to the client. If you feel, okay, I need 4 weeks to do this, don't be afraid to say it. And it's something I had to relearn after being in corporate, when I was told what my deadline is. And then I had to relearn, I can set my own deadlines and I can stick to them and it's fine. And if I can't, I'll be honest with the customer and I'll be saying, right, I need an extra week on that. And so I think honesty and those values of integrity, it helps you as you're going along, and that helps build your reputation if you're known as being trustworthy, honest, and upfront.
Excellent advice. Thank you so much, Rozina. If we go to another question, as a person with multiple interests, how do I identify good ideas?
I think that's quite a different. How do I identify good ideas? I think it's again taking a little bit of that sort of design thinking approach. I mean, I think it's identifying good ideas. I think you have to be aware of what you're attracted to. What is it that you're attracted to doing? Why are you attracted to doing that? And I think the good ideas, we can all have hundreds of good ideas, but it's about what it is you want to execute on. I think there's never any harm in, if you think something is a good idea, sit down at the drawing table and think, how will you create that from concept to execution? What are the different scenarios in that idea as you're building the process and what you would like that outcome to be? Think about several outcomes, use a little bit of foresight or a little bit of futures thinking. And I think it's about identifying what that problem is. What is the problem you want to solve with your idea? And for me, it became very clear because, as I mentioned, some things were linked to the personal things, gender. Well, I'm a big advocate of women and feminist cities and feminist urbanism. That was something that really attracted me, and also it came from a personal experience of having been attacked in a personal space, in a public space. But thankfully I do karate, so I was able to defend myself. But I thought, what if you can't defend yourself? And then the mental health, well, that's just been part of my journey. My late mother was also a paranoid schizophrenic, and my son has got mental health challenges. So I know I want to try and create what would be an inclusive community. How can we design better for people with mental health challenges? So I think if it's ideas that are aligned with something that you have an emotional or professional attachment to, give it a go. There's no such thing as failing. You try, and you go back to the drawing board, try again. Maybe it's a different route, talk to other people if they've done something similar. And I think sharing and, doing that sort of a bit of the sort of researching the market on that sector of what you think is a good idea and what you want to develop. Who are your competitors? What are they doing? And I think you really need to kind of, as I say, use that design thinking approach and then sort of validate the idea, do a pilot, do a small scale thing, doesn't need to cost a lot of money, and try it out and test it. And then you can sort of have the feeling, is this something good? Do I want to pursue this or not?
Okay, so another question. What ethics have you helped you in your entrepreneurial journey?
I think some of them I probably mentioned there. I really felt that transparency and honesty with clients when I first started out my design company. A lot of them said to me, oh gosh, we reached out to 3 designers and only you replied. And I thought, wow, it's the whole thing about, if you need a plumber or electrician, it's like, let's contact a few and who's going to turn up. And that really amazed me, of actually just the basics, I think, of having also that real listening to the client, that customer focus, understanding and prioritizing them and their needs and what it is they're asking for, and being very honest in that, in my delivery of that work. And also, I think accountability, be taking responsibility for the actions and decisions that I take, both individually and as my organization, as a company. Being willing to rectify any mistakes and being honest and open in that as well. I think that really, or any shortcomings, just being upfront on that, I think. And I think having that integrity as a business, you want to have that, you want to have a good reputation when you're starting out. And, I would always make a point that, I would have, if somebody emailed me, for example, I would make sure I get back within 48 hours, if not 24 hours at the start, and I'd follow up with a call and, just to be responsive, I think, and that respect for the stakeholders around me, if I was in a collaborative project, treating everyone with respect, I think is absolutely essential. Leaving the ego at the door. And really just never think you know it all, because nobody does. And always taking a view of, being like a sponge and taking in as much, information as possible. And I think really also valuing diversity and inclusion. This is a deep, deep thing for me. Fostering, a culture where I practice what I preach is very, very important for me.
Rozina, I'm going to try just to fit one more question, and very briefly, it's from the live one, and I think it's really, really important. The person mentions the whole mother-work balance. I'm always skeptical about starting a family because I'm afraid I would have to give up opportunities, including jobs and PhD. So I'm just taking just the first part of it, just because that's the time that would allow us. What's your thoughts, Rozina?
There's never a right time, I would say. I think I also, went through these challenges, I think, of thinking, oh goodness, is now the right time to start a family? Is it not, when I was in corporate? And I had to go with my heart first. And I think we have to know that indeed, it's very challenging for women. I have also in my career faced discrimination for being a woman. And I think this is something that we certainly are still battling, without a doubt, as a gender. And I think there's never the right time, and just do what you have to do what you feel is right for you. And trust in the universe. It will be okay. It will be okay.
What an amazing journey, Rozina. Thank you so, so much for your time. Genuinely, I enjoyed every minute of it. Thank you so, so much. I'm sure everyone else did enjoy it as well. And I'm really sorry I couldn't take all the questions, but amazing. Thank you so, so much, Rozina. That was fascinating. Thank you.
Very welcome. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming along today and for this invitation.
Thank you.